Scott, I have a question for you. You attend the football games at the University of Minnesota. What are the players on that team called?
The Golden Gophers.
Are they?
They are not Gophers. No.
Okay. You have another football team in that town. It's the Minnesota franchise of the NFL. What are those players called?
They're called the Minnesota Vikings.
Are they Vikings?
Well, they used to be. We used to do, but no, they're not.
No. Is there a single person on that team that's a Viking?
No.
No. If I were to go, say, the University of Florida State, they call themselves the Seminoles after the native Indian population in that area that America so butchered. Are the football players or the baseball players or any of the athletes of Florida State Seminoles?
No. Well, actually, they might be. I mean, because the Seminoles are still a tribe, so there might. I mean,
well, let me answer the question for you. No, there's not a single Seminole that has played for Florida State and the football program. America just annihilated the Seminoles. Now, what about the University of Miami? What are they called?
They're called the Hurricanes.
Oh, are there any Hurricanes that play football for the University of Miami?
Well, I think they'd be a better team if there were.
Yeah, how about the NFL franchise in Washington, D.C.? What are they called?
They are the Redskins.
Yeah. Are there currently any players on that team that are Redskins?
No.
So just calling something, somebody something does not make them that, does it? The Chicago football players, they're not Bears, really, are they?
No. No, they are not.
No. The St. Louis football players, they're not really Rams, are they?
Nope.
So calling somebody something does not make them that. Calling a place Palestine because you have grown out of the anti-Semitism of the beast that is Rome and the Roman Catholic Church, and its love for Latin, and using that term, does that make those people Palestinians because you applied that label to it?
No.
No. Now, as it relates to the Philistines, when was the last Philistine annihilated?
2,500 years ago.
2,500 years ago. That is correct. Now, if you were to write a letter to, and I want to postmark the letter during a time that somebody had renamed your country, and you wanted that letter to have a postmark that would be useful, would you name it after what it had once been, when it was no longer called that, or would you put the legal postmark as to what it was currently called?
You want it to get there.
Yeah. So this notion that this is up for auction because it means something is just absolutely ignorant of the facts. It means nothing.
Right. Well, that was, that wasn't like, I don't think anybody was alleging that the people residing in that place had a genetic or historical connection to the ancient Philistines. That's not necessarily what they're saying. What they're saying is that somebody
that a Jewish leader acknowledged the name Palestine, and that's not what she was doing.
But in a de facto sense, she was at least acknowledging that somebody called it. Somebody was actively calling it Palestine.
The British, because of their grotesque immorality and their dishonesty, applied that name to it. And knowing full well that that was not the appropriate name, and in their arrogance and their immorality, they applied that name to it. What that is an indication as to how immoral, how ignorant, how irresponsible the British were. And that's all it means. It means nothing else than an ode to British stupidity, immorality, their hatred of all things Jews. The fact is that prior to the Six-Day War, and you can look up all the history of this, you could spend a month of years on it. And what you will find is that the Muslims in Israel did not refer to themselves as Palestinians, nor did the Muslims outside of Israel did they refer to the place as Palestine or to themselves as Palestinians or to the residents there as Palestinians until after They lost the Six-Day War. And after they lost the Six-Day War, they came up with this grand idea. If we refer to the place as Palestine and then call ourselves Palestinians, that it will look like the Jews are occupying our land and that they've taken our proper homeland away from us, and they have sailed with that myth, and it is repulsive. Now, I do want to address the rest of Netanyahu's comments. Mr. Netanyahu responded to the criticism. I'm absolutely no intention of absolving Hitler. Now, he did not say that I'm not trying to blame a Palestinian leader, because at the time he was not a Palestinian leader. No one referred to themselves as Palestinians during the time of World War II. He then says, but he added, it is absurd to ignore the role played by the Mufti, this Muslim, citing the testimony of the deputy of Adolf Eichmann, considered the architect of the Holocaust at the Nuremberg trials. I read that testimony to you on this program. He said the Mufti played a role in the decision of the German government to exterminate European Jews. Those are the facts. And just because you want to be politically correct, you ought not ignore the facts. And Netanyahu said, these facts must not be disregarded. He repeatedly suggested to the various authorities with whom he had been in contact, all before he met with Hitler, including Ribbentrop and Himmler, that the Jews of Europe should be exterminated. He considered this the comfortable solution to the Jewish problem. That is the truth. And it's astonishing. It's just astonishing how political correctness has so corrupted people's corrupted their thinking and incapacitated their ability to use evidence and reason. And here it's not just that they can't come to the obvious conclusion where the facts lead. They're overtly adverse to it and have to deny the truth, have to accuse somebody of lying when they're telling the truth. Wow.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting. I have mixed emotions about this stuff because I understand that Yahowah's coming back, to Israel and stuff. He's going to redeem his people, his covenant people, and all that sort of thing. I have, as someone who is neither Jewish nor Muslim, I know the Muslims want to kill me. The Jews consider me a dog to serve them. We did this the other day, the Talmudic Zionists. And
that's unfair. Excuse me, that's unfair. And the reason no, I don't want to hang on. I've been over this before, and I'm not going to hang on. That is grotesquely unfair. And the reason that's so unfair is because the Muslims, without provocation, wrote in their Quran, Muhammad contributing to the Quran and to the Hadith, had their God call Jews asses and swine, and tell them that he personally was going to adhere to their torture and that he was a terrorist against them. And without any provocation, Muslims eradicated the Jews. They murdered them, they robbed them, they enslaved them, they raped them, they did everything they could possibly do to them, and are continuing to do that without provocation. In the case of the Talmud, which I am not going to defend, but I'm going to at least set it in the context of history. The Babylonian Talmud, from which you are quoting, has very few references to Goyim. But the few references to Goyim were written in around 500 CE. At the time, and for 150 years prior to that time, the most dominant authority in the world was Imperial Rome, which then became the Roman Catholic Church. And if you were to read now, in fact, if you haven't done it, read in Yahowah, in the 7th volume of Yahowah, there are 2 long chapters on Imperial Rome, the ultimate beast. And what I did in the second of those chapters is I spent about 20 pages detailing the propaganda of Imperial Rome and the Roman Catholic Church as it related to Jews, and then their activities, their murderous activities related to Jews. And when you realize that they had this ultimate beast of Goyim that became the Roman Catholic Church, had not only bludgeoned Israel and salted the land and crucified hundreds of thousands of Jews and killed hundreds of thousands more, and had expelled them from the land, stealing their wealth and forcing them to serve as slaves. And then the historians of Rome were blaming the Jews for their own plight. That with that being the overwhelming context of that time, it would have been absurd not to have negative commentary from any Jew in response to what the Goyim had done and was doing to them at 500 CE. So to blame the Talmud for it being anti-Goy under the conditions and the time that it was written is just not fair. So be really careful when you state that Judaism is anti-Goy and equate that with Islam. That's not fair.
Yeah, and I would hope. No, I'm just talking about those who write such things, not Jewish people.
Well, and those were written at 500 CE in the context of where the power of Goyim, which was Imperial Rome as it was becoming the Roman Catholic Church and had become the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, by 400, it wasn't Imperial Rome anymore. It was the Roman Catholic Church. That if you study that period and look what happened in the 500 years prior to it and was being promoted at that time, there is no sane person, no moral person in the world who wouldn't have written the same thing about the behavior of the animals that became known as Goyim.
Right. Now, in modern context, it troubles me that the Mossad has a motto that says, by deception shall you make war. But all of the governments of the world are deceptive.
Yes, correct.
The CIA's motto is the truth shall set you free, and yet they deal in precious little truth.
Oh, of course.
So, so to me, they're all sort of Babylons out of
if you were to say that I have trouble supporting Israel because the Israeli government is at oft times counterproductive, that they're saying and doing things that are not conducive to its own survival. For example, giving lip service to a two-state solution, to even using the term Palestinian in any discussion, I would agree with you. I think they are counterproductive. Good grief. First of all, before I say the good grief, one of the things I really like is when somebody brings up something that I know to be untrue, maybe factually accurate but misleading, and giving the opportunity to challenge that position. And Glenn is one of the very few people who is willing to do that. And I want to make certain that it comes across that I really like Glenn, and I really like the fact that Glenn brought up these two things, because I think the show is much more interesting if we can have a spontaneous reaction to something that has to be viewed in context to be understood. And so, Glenn, I want to thank you for bringing up both those 2 points, and I think you understood. I could just tell from the tone of your voice that what you were bringing up is useful to a show like this, because it plays right into our strengths, to our ability to correct something in context and provide understanding, because the positions that you articulated there, while technically true, are those that will be taken by others to demonstrate a conclusion that's absolutely false. So you provided a context for us to talk about this. Now I want to go ahead.
I'm from the background of active debate, so I'm used to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I view things propositionally and don't get emotionally involved, when an issue is being hammered out.
I actually do become emotionally involved because I care a lot about these issues, because these issues are issues to which Yahowah himself becomes emotionally involved, and it's pretty hard to be part of the covenant and not be emotionally involved. Although I will make a distinction between the children of Israel and the Israeli government that flies under the flag of the Star of David. There is a difference between the two, although I will acknowledge being a Zionist because Yahowah is a Zionist. Now, that all being true, it's just that last commercial from Longevity was enough to make me want to barf. And again, if GCN wants to fire me, terminate this show because of my comments regarding their most valued advertiser, so be it. But it was repulsive for this man, first of all, to refer to himself as a doc. He's a veterinarian. And for him to say that veterans should join his pyramid scheme, to be at the lowest ranks of his pyramid scheme, that's going to save America, that yet another pyramid scheme, multi-level marketing, selling 25-cent items for $10 is and really robbing people of their money based upon all forms of false claims, that's going to save America, that you ought, as a patriot, as a military veteran, you ought to save America by buying into our pyramid scheme and waving the flag around your pyramid scheme and providing false hope regarding your pyramid scheme. To me, that's repulsive. And if you don't want to call it a pyramid, it is a pyramid scheme. It's not a Ponzi scheme, it's a pyramid scheme. It's the nature of this kind of multi-level marketing. And trust me, folks, I went to Scott's. I said, I don't know how much longer I can handle this with these kinds of ads being, and I'm not paid anything here. I'm doing this for free.
Your nose to spite your face. It's not worth cutting off your nose to spite your face, really.
Yeah, I know. So long as I have the opportunity to respond and say, don't do that, and that I have no association with this, and you ought not listen to them, then we can go on. Kirk, I'm sorry, you've been quiet here for a while. I'm passionate about those two issues. There's no such thing as a Palestinian.
I don't think Glenn. I've known Glenn a long time too. I don't think neither one of us or both of us got a thick skin. We don't care.
Yeah.
We engage in the debate. That's fine.
Yeah.
So I had one thing, if you
please, Kirk.
In the future shows or any time from now on, is I had this little epiphany. I looked up all the things that we talked about before, those things about Assad that from WikiLeaks, and I was doing my homework on that, and then I started leaping about a bit, and I had kind of an epiphany in a historical sense, and it occurred to me in light of what I was reading about the State Department, basically how they were going to overthrow Assad. And
but it's the problem isn't the State Department. Is it a problem that the U.S. State Department and the CIA have continually acted since the end of World War II in assassinating and overthrowing the heads of foreign governments? Well, that is a problem in and of itself. The problem with the U.S. State Department, the CIA, the FBI, Department of Defense at all, and the White House, multiple administrations, as it relates to the overthrow of Assad, was the means that they were going to use to do it, which included a Sunni Shia civil war of America's creation. Of turning peaceful demonstrations and lies about such into an armed conflict. We created this mess. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. Kirk, recognizing that the thing that you were studying was the admission and release documents that the United States government planned the violent civil war in Syria, exactly as it has been carried out, and planned it 3 to 5 years before the first peaceful uprising. And
that goes back to 2006.
Yeah, back in 2006 is when we coined the document to create the mess in Syria and Iraq, really, that we're witnessing today.
It laid out every conceivable option we had, every person in there that in the family that hated one another, how to get to them, how to turn the Sunnis against the Shias, how to bring in the Kurds, everything that Assad.
How to create a pile of lies and distortions.
And how to play off anybody who wanted to play with them.
Right.
I mean, my God.
Exactly.
You read it makes you want to throw up.
It makes you want to throw up because we're not only denying what we have done as a country, we're blaming others. We're blaming Russia. We're blaming Iran. We're blaming all manner of blaming the Islamic State. We did all of this. I mean, we planned it purposefully and deliberately, and it's resulted in the loss of 1 million lives, because it's more than just Syria; it's also Iraq. It's our not stupidity, our malevolent actions, as led by the Department of Defense, State Department, the CIA, FBI, and the last 2 administrations, have caused the death of 1 million people and the exile of almost 20 million. Fundamentally changed the world and led it to the brink of World War III, and a war that's unavoidable at this point, and we did it deliberately. So you were going to say, what, in the context of history, what did you find that you thought was interesting?
I'd never thought about it before, but I was reading. We went from the ancient days of the Roman Empire to a modern empire. So this is I don't want to be too long-winded, but Ottoman Empire, you had the British, the Austro-Habsburg Empire, the Russian Empire, and all the little empires of the French and Spanish.
Right.
Were faded by the time of World War I, and something strange happened at the end of World War I. We stopped becoming empires, and something evolved that was called a nation state. And I was speculating, I was thinking on that, and I said, that really comes from the American experiment, where these British guys. My take on English, on American history is not quite the same as everybody else. You got these really rich, smart English guys in America, and they virtually take over the choice land of the British Empire and divide it up among themselves. And they're very much into checks and balances. That's obvious when you read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And they divide up the country into nation states. Because they were. I mean, they had more power in the state than they had in the federal government. That was a much later invention of the federal government being something besides a regulator of a few trade and money. So they've had this grand experiment, and it worked extraordinarily well. And then by the end of the World War I, it seems to me that the empires are too hard to control as empires. So they build these city-states, or these, not city-states, but rather nation-states. And so look at the way we've divided up the world. We divided up South America. We divided up Africa. We divided up most of Asia. And we divided up all the Arabian Peninsula.
Particularly if you're looking at the British influence over these places.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the Americans are the British influence. I mean, we just took over.
Because we're the blunt end of their
the same Roman Empire, modern Roman Empire, as us.
Yeah.
They decided this is a better way to. Things don't just all of a sudden happen.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this too is the way that we established our empire of nation states is through our military and military bases. The projection of American military might was the ability to do this, where the client state must acquiesce to American and British demands, because otherwise their military doesn't function.
Well, as the reporter once said, if you turn against America or the U.S. dollar or anything that keys them off, then you'll have the American army on your border claiming we're going to save you we're going to overthrow you for democracy.
Right. Yeah, you have the CIA.
For fine art.
Yeah, when the Shah of Iran said, America's way too imposing and doing things that are absolutely against the best interest of the people of Iran. And when he expressed some desire for some independence from American empire and control, American colonialism, that's when he was overthrown.
Oh, yeah.
America discarded him.
One, the Ba'ath Party member before him.
And the Ba'ath Party
became a communist, so they could sell it.
Right, and then after him in Iraq, we promoted the Saddam Hussein and used Saddam Hussein before turning against him.
Yeah.
We used the Taliban and promoted the Taliban and armed the Taliban before warring against them.
I mean, we're just as devious as hell.
We're as devious as hell.
It's a wolf in sheep clothing. I don't know what it is, because we sell it as democracy. We sell it as freedom-loving people and all this stuff. And then we become a dictator over them. So, well, I mean, it's just, and it's obviously easier to divide and conquer or divide and control. So we break it all up. Can you imagine what I'm sure they were thinking, you know, when they discovered oil all over the Middle East, they said, you know, if this became one big empire, man, they're too much for us to handle.
Right. Yes, we divided things up into fiefdoms in the Middle East.
While we're on the topic of deviousness, can I pitch one more across the plate?
Right.
Have you heard this has fallen under the heading of deviousness? Somebody's lying here, or this is a question of the best enemies money can buy. Have you heard the report of a Israeli brigadier general, Yussi Alan Shahat, being captured in Iraq leading ISIS forces? Have you come across that one yet?
No. You know, when I was reading a number of articles, the first article that I want to share on the consequence of the WikiLeaks release of that 2006 document from Central Intelligence of the United States, that they write in this article that imply that Israel had an interest in trying to overthrow Assad through the use of the Islamic State. And yet, while they project that, there is absolutely no documentation, no inference, nothing in any of the released documents, no evidence to come to that conclusion. They just say, well, you know, everybody had something to gain and something to lose, and so you know, Israel probably, but they took out the probably. You know, Israel wanted it because if they destabilized Assad, they could, you know, keep the Golan forever. You know, it's just so. No, is there the possibility that there is a Mossad agent that is embedded in the Islamic State? I'd say the likelihood of that nears 100%. There's a Mossad agent embedded in the very top echelons of the Syrian government, has been for 40 or 50 years. Embedded in the highest echelons of the Iranian government, has been for 40 or 50 years. The Israelis play for keeps when it comes to intelligence. And they have men and women who are willing to risk everything to become, to earn the opportunity to be at the highest echelons of every one of Israel's foes. Not for the purpose of defeating Israel, but for the purpose of saving Israel. And so is there a possibility that there's a Mossad agent that's embedded within the Islamic State? Absolutely. That's how the Mossad works. They don't bribe people like the CIA does to turn tail on their brothers and to well, essentially steal American money and be counterproductive. They do the job themselves, so very possible. And the only way you're going to earn the trust to move up in a jihadi organization is to act like a jihadi. But you know, the Islamic State is not the principal target of the Russians and Syria. Do you know why that is, Kirk?
Well, say that again.
The Islamic State, if you look at all the bombings, forget about the rhetoric. You know, actions speak louder than words. If you look at all the bombings of the Russians, which are all either immediately around Damascus and Homs to the south, or up there by Aleppo to the northwest, if you look at all of the bombings that have been conducted by the Russians in Syria, one of the things you'll notice is that all of the bombings are against al-Nusra or other rebel groups, and virtually, 5%, 10% maybe for window dressing, are in areas where the Islamic State is headquartered. Why would 90% of the Russian attacks and bombings in Syria be against non-Islamic State targets?
Is it the Shias any difference?
Nope. The Islamic State emerged from the Awakening program, an American program in Iraq, to protect Sunni Muslims from the onslaught being perpetrated against them with American weapons and American guidance by Shia Muslims from Iran. That's how it emerged. That's how it conquered Mosul. That's how it conquered Fallujah. That's how it moved into and kept control over all of the high percentage Sunni Islamic areas of Iraq and Syria, and has not been dislodged from any of the high percentage Sunni areas. They're in a position where they're trying to protect Sunnis against Shias.
Right.
Their enemy is Shia Islam.
Right.
Their stated enemy isn't the city-state of Damascus. If you look at the Islamic State, they don't have any troops situated around Damascus. They have a few that are by the Golan Heights. They have a few that are next to Jordan. And they have a few that are up there near the Turkish border for future jihadists. But they have none that are next to the Kurds. They don't care about the Kurds.
No, nobody cares about the Kurds.
And they've got none around Damascus.
Right.
It's al-Nusra that wanted to overthrow the Syrian government because of its affinity for Shia Islam and Iran. And it's not the Islamic State. So the reality is that there is no reason to bomb the Islamic State, and Russia's not doing it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Al-Nusra can be defeated. All these articles, too, they say, that there's weapons that America has trained and Free Syrian Army. At the end of the Free Syrian Army presentation, they'll all say, well, it's not really an army. There's really no command and control. They're really just jihadi organizations, but they're jihadi organizations that America is giving weapons to, and very sophisticated weapons, missiles now, surface-to-air missiles, anti-tank missiles. So who are they going to use those anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles against?
Ultimately, Israel.
And then between now and then, the Russians.
Yeah, well, the Russians, sure.
And, we've announced that we have curtailed the program to train moderate Muslims because it didn't work. But yet we're still providing cargo planes worth of munitions, very sophisticated munitions, to the jihadi groups that we call the Free Syrian Army, even though there's no such thing.
No. So you I'm sorry, maybe I'm missing something here. We're still proxying with the Sunnis.
Yes.
And the WikiLeaks thing, when you start reading that stuff, I can't figure out who's on whose side, because they're 1 minute they're with the Iraqis, which we know are Shias, so they can take over Ramadi or whatever the little town is up the way, and then the next minute we're over here bombing ISIS, which is a Sunni proxy that was started with the Saudi Arabians through China, released through them, and to fight.
We say we're on the side of the Turks, and yet the Turks are anti-Assad because he's a Shiite, and they're Sunnis, and yet our principal and most effective ally in Syria are the Kurds, and who are the Turks bombing?
Turks bombing the Kurds.
Right, who are our ally. Why don't we scream that the Turks are bombing the Kurds, who are our principal ally, the people we've given the most weapons to? And why are we screaming that the Russians are bombing our allies when they're bombing al-Nusra, the Sunni terrorists associated with al-Qaeda? And we scream that, oh boy, they shouldn't be doing that. That's counterproductive. But we don't scrutinize then they're bombing the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist organization. And we don't scream when the Turks bomb the Kurds with our airplanes, mind you, and our bombs.
See, I don't see the Russian involvement as anything other than they get their foothold kept in the Mediterranean for a port. Yes, that's important. Not the most important, but that's important. They have a client state in Iran, which owns Iraq.
Right.
Syria is their client state, as was from the Ba'ath Party days, because before it flipped. So now Assad and all that crowd, they're only important to the Russians because now they have this massive amount of, they want their stake just like the British and the French and Americans fought over Arabia. They want their stake in the oil-rich part of the Middle East.
I finally figured it, and I've been really slow to figure it out. I I knew that the reason the Russians were there is because of the Russians' deals with the Iranians, because of the pipelines and the gas and oil around the Caspian Sea, and that America's sanctions against Russia had put Russia in a position where they were their most viable trading partner, and that put Russia and Iran in bed together. It was counterproductive from an American point of view, but either the abominator wanted America to be vulnerable, wanted Russia to have to lash out, or was just stupid. You can take your pick.
Yeah.
As it relates to, so that's why Russia is defending Syria, is because of its economic liaisons with Iran. What I had not put together before Assange so eloquently stated it, he said, you know, so you've just gone through this whole new empire, an empire of controlling nation states. And what Assad pointed out, he says the American empire is based upon having 1,400 military bases in 120 countries.
Right.
And while that is important, I think there's something more important that he did not say. And, you know, being a pilot and having to deal with maintenance of sophisticated equipment and studying military equipment, for example, many military jets, for example, our most sophisticated, the Joint Strike Fighter, they require on average about 50 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour of combat flight time.
Right.
Okay. So that airplane is, and its ordnance and its the training to use it, its ongoing ability to be effective, of which you've spent billions of dollars to have a squadron of these, whether it be our tanks, our sophisticated bombs, or our aircraft. You've spent tens of billions of dollars on equipment that is absolutely and completely useless unless America maintains it and trains your people on it and supplies everything, including parts for it. And America is not going to do that unless you acquiesce to America's empire demands.
Right. Who has the control?
So America ends up controlling the world and its empire through the sales of advanced military hardware. And so the Ukraine, the whole episode in Ukraine was to take Ukraine from Russian military hardware to American military hardware so we could control it. The whole issue in Syria is whose military hardware are they going to buy? And how much more military hardware can we sell to the Muslim countries if we create a civil war between Sunnis and Shias and therefore have even more control?
Right. What a profit motive.
But when you give people who are more ruthless, less moral than the Nazis, whose religion it is to kill, to rob, to deceive, those kinds of weapons, what's the consequence going to be?
Deadly beyond belief.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, you cannot have a military hardware without control of the resources like oil. Oil is the glue that holds it all together.
Well, it's the fuel.
It's the fuel, yeah.
I mean, it's these
these
warplanes are
also flip about Africa.
Yeah, our fighters and bombers are stunningly inefficient. I mean, just stunningly inefficient in terms of their fuel guzzling, as is our naval ships. Stunningly inefficient. And so they run on black ooze on this fuel. And it is the power and economics of the world. It's why the Ukraine, again, was chosen as the place that America wanted to intervene in, because of the importance of the pipelines that went through, the oil and gas pipelines that went through the Ukraine. That's why Iran is so pivotal in the world. It's why Iran's power has arisen. It's the fuel for the militarism of the world is oil.
Right. And the bases are there because it's too expensive to keep your airport on top of a ship called an aircraft carrier and put it everywhere you want to go. You just already have it there. Yes.
Correct. 1,400 of them in 120 countries.
And that's an amazing number. I knew it was about 900. I didn't realize it was that big, but wow.
And the fact that the United States is the supplier of 75% of the Muslim world's advanced weaponry. We are the merchants of weapons of mass destruction. And of the remaining 25%, Russia is actually a small part of it. It's Russia only supplies Syria and Iran. You know, you've got the French and the British and the Germans who are suppliers of most of the rest in terms of weapons of mass destruction. And we created this war in Syria just so that we could have the opportunity to sell more of these weapons of mass destruction to the very people who would obliterate the only place on earth that God cares about.
So now who's the wolf in sheep clothing? Now who's the Roman Empire?
You know, that the Abominator having the speech to the United Nations and talking about, you know, those who use force will succumb to force, and it's only the peacemakers and those who use diplomacy that will prevail. And yet, you look at Syria, the only purveyors of diplomacy in Syria have been the Russians.
Yeah.
And the only purveyors of exclusively force have been the Americans. And, you know, even in Syria, from America's point of view, the only solution is to, A, do away with Assad, which will make Syria even worse, and B, to have a one Syrian government where all people, regardless of religion and ethnicity, live happily together. Yeah, we tried that in Iraq, didn't we? How well did that turn out? I mean, there's only one peaceful place in all of Iraq, and it's only peaceful when the Turks aren't bombing them, and that's the new Kurdistan in Iraq, which was wholly and completely adverse to American policy. Yeah, well, you read you mentioned yesterday, the New York Times has a feature story on the mess that is Syria, and how the Russians are an ally of America in Syria, and that they're both allegedly against the Islamic State, but Russia is an ally of Assad, who we're opposed to there. We're allied with the Kurds, but the Turks, whom we're allied with, are opposed to the Kurds. We're against the Islamic State, but the Islamic State is against the Assad regime. We're funding freedom fighters, but we say, nope, there really are none of those. That program doesn't exist anymore. But who are we arming then?